Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Irish Food Trade Connect Conversations. I am delighted to have Jacqui Hanna from the Foundry Vault with me today on this lovely sunny day. We were just saying here before we started what heat we have. We should be delighted. Jacqui, where are you located?
I'm in Coleraine in the far north of Ireland, Margaret, and today I think we're looking at 22 degrees and it's 9:30 in the morning.
I know.
So
Where
yeah,
else would you get it? And I'm here in Dublin and it's the same. So,
oh, it's lovely.
it's fantastic. Fantastic. A great day to be having a chat, Jacqui. So tell me about your background anyway, Jacqui. Tell me.
So I think when I was thinking about this morning, my background is in management and problem solving, but I think from an early age, my favourite word was why, how. And so I've always been in business. I've always solved problems, but coming into a new business, I didn't change my outlook on anything. I didn't know anything about whiskey apart from I like to drink it. And when I came into this business, I came in with the same head. Why do we do this? How do we do this? Who's telling me the right things? So, yeah, just problem solving. I'm a parent. I'm a mum. I'm everything. We
Oh,
do that naturally. So
we're
we're
multitaskers. Let me
multitasking.
tell you. Yeah, you are.
Definitely, definitely. So, yeah, I'm previously an interior designer, so like to put a bit of fluff onto things and make things better for people. Left that industry pre-COVID, and then during COVID times, then of course everything changed for everyone. And I think a lot of us had big life-changing moments where we thought, am I happy doing what I'm doing? Would I like the change? Would I like a challenge? And I knew something was out there, Margaret, but at that time didn't know what that thing was.
That's a, you've just hit a chord with me because I had the very same during COVID, and you kind of then go forward and go, do I like doing this? Why am I doing this? Am I
That's
doing this
exactly
just
right.
because I need to bring in a salary? Or am I doing this because I actually like doing it? And why am I doing it?
That's
Yeah, you're
exactly
dead
right.
right. Why am
Yeah,
I
and
doing
I
it?
had realised that I didn't like doing what I was doing anymore, COVID pulled me out of that comfort zone of just getting on with it and made me go, hey, you know what? There could be something out there that fulfills me. There could be something that is a completely different thing from what I've ever known, and I just waited for it rather than looking for it. I'm a great believer in that things
Okay,
come
so
to you.
tell me a bit about that you waited for it rather
But
than
I
going
do
looking for
have
it.
a bit of a spiritual side to me, so I do have a lot of things I do and meditation, and I truly believe that things are sent to you for a reason. And it's a strange one. We have a number plate 333, and that's whiskey. Triple distilled 3 years. All the threes associated with whiskey have always been on my car. And I'm a great believer that those things that are meant to come to you come when they're supposed to come. And COVID, I think, for a lot of people, while it was awful, was a big life changing moment. Um, we founded the Foundry in 2021. And of course, no one had any bar access, no one could go drinking during COVID. And a very good friend of mine and my husband's wanted a bar built in his back garden in the garage because that's what we all did
Yeah.
during COVID. And we had a discussion with him, and I came out of retirement just to do this bar for the interior design for him. And we were having a discussion about, of all things, cryptocurrency. And I said to him, I don't understand cryptocurrency, all that stuff. It's way above my head. And he says, you should be investing in Irish whiskey. And I said, I wouldn't be doing that either. I like to drink it, but I don't want casks off it. And he started to explain to me that the industry in Northern Ireland had no maturation. And I knew what maturation was because we're 6 miles away from Bushmills. We all know what Bushmills does, and we all
Yeah.
know they've got these massive warehouses and the smell's amazing. And we started having this wonderful chat about maturation, and he was in the industry, and he's actually one of our co-founders. And we discussed it, and he says it's never been done in Northern Ireland before. It would be under the remit of HMRC. Third party maturation has never existed. And I said, well, I just happen to have an industrial site full of warehouses, which I did, and we don't know what to do with it. And that was it. the baby was born, and 6 months later we were approved to store and mature Irish whiskey in Northern Ireland. So it's been
Nice. So you're the only one in Northern Ireland doing this.
we were at the time. There was
At
another
the time.
company who was going for the same approvals, but we went harder and faster, and we did what we set out to do, and we brought our first casks in 2021, the end of 2021. So yeah.
So tell me how, like, from going from interior design to going into whiskey, did you not? So you obviously felt the fear, and I'll do it anyway. Did you?
I think it didn't take time to breathe. It was exciting, and the journey with the approval process. The last thing I thought I was going to have to give was blood. Everything was, you put your life on the line with the authorities, with HMRC, and there were times when that got a bit dark, and that was hard work. That was really hard work. And because it had never been done before, Margaret, I felt like I'm the eldest of two girls. It felt like a big sister syndrome. It felt, I'm going to have to do this first, and then everyone else will find it easy.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm the oldest myself, I know.
There you go. So
Yeah.
this big sister syndrome had kicked in, and I thought to myself, I am paving the way for whoever comes behind me, but that's okay, because that's what you do. And HMRC were finding their feet with it all, because they hadn't done this in Northern Ireland. They'd done it in Scotland, but they hadn't done it for Irish whiskey in Northern Ireland for third party. Opening bank accounts was difficult. Opening anything was difficult, because no one knew what third party maturation for Irish whiskey was. No one could understand the concept. They thought we were a distillery. And so I had a lot of challenges at the beginning. It was hard work, but by that stage then I had the feet dug in, and I was going to prove to everyone that we were going to do this, and we were going to be the best.
And so getting customers in then with their whiskey to store it, how did you go about that? Or, like what types, like what origins? Is it all Irish whiskey that you store?
Yes, so with your approval from HMRC, and with your approvals from what's called the GI team, the GI team are they look after things. Like champagne can only be made in the Champagne region. It's the easiest way to describe it to people. So Irish whiskey can only be made on the island of Ireland, of which we are now the island of Ireland in Northern Ireland, as well as being Great Britain. All very complicated, but we're deemed as Irish here, and so getting customers wasn't difficult. Our other co-founder was in the industry. He was able to put us in contact with cask management companies, of which there were a lot. There's a lot of cask management companies selling casks to private individuals for tax-free returns. And so we had done a couple of deals before we got our approvals through, on the strength we would get those approvals. So finding the customers wasn't so difficult at the beginning, and now we're having to turn some customers away, because we're just, we're there's loads of whiskey in every single day.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
And do you have any synergies then with the cask makers, the cask operators, or do the producers themselves organise that?
So
and
we have. Within the first year of being in business, we had finished our second warehouse. So at that stage, we're probably about 10,000 casks of whiskey. And one of the larger companies we worked with asked us, would we fill into cask for them? And that became a big operational thing for us, because what they were going to do then is, rather than deliver the casks in cask form, they were going to deliver empty casks, and we were going to be responsible for filling them. So we installed a fill tank. The operations behind that, you have to be very diligent about amounts, about levels, about strengths. There's a lot of paperwork, and so my spreadsheets that were quite basic and easy to handle very suddenly became 10,000 pieces for every cask that was there. But it also became then a management system for this fill tank operation, and that's where you can start to see, if there was manual error in the warehouse from one of our operators, which naturally happens, am I going to be worried about that all the time, or HMRC going to find something wrong? And so the system started to become slightly more complicated, and the spreadsheets became bigger and in my eyes much more vulnerable. I was very fortunate to have someone working with me who had been in the industry for a long time. For 30 years she had been in the industry, and and together our spreadsheets they were really, really good. But coming from the background I had, I could just see this vulnerability with them. I was weary. What if something happened to the girl who did them for me? What if something went wrong on one day? What if a bug came in and deleted them? My brain never stopped thinking that I could see the vulnerabilities, which is when then my wonderful Prophet stepped in and...
Okay, so yeah, because it is, and even from an audit perspective as well, I can imagine. So how did Proof 8 come into the business, or how? So you realised all this information was getting bigger.
This was really quick. Yeah, this was within the first year of trading, and there was another thing, Margaret, because we were working with cask management companies. Those cask management companies were sending, or asking me to send them, or doing it themselves, sending out these certificates of ownership. This was a big thing in the industry, in this cask management industry. These cask management companies held licenses called Wogers, or in Britain they like to call them Wildgers, or I was duty rep for them. And that was like a protection for the warehouse. We only had to work with the cask management companies, the broker. They had these thousands of people who owned all of these casks, and we didn't have to know who these people were. But what they would do was sometimes they would ask us to send out a certificate to prove ownership. And being a designer, I designed the most beautiful certificate. It's gorgeous. Printed them out, told people, yeah, your management company says this is your cask, it's stored here at the Foundry vault. Or they would do it themselves. And I was at home one day, and someone came into my driveway and they said, I'm here to see my cask. And I said, how did you get my address, my home address? And they showed a certificate to me which one of the cask management companies had sent out, and instead of putting the Foundry Vault's address on it, they'd actually put my personal home address on it. And they were looking around my house to see where their cask was stored, and I realised how out of date and how vulnerable at that stage a certificate was. It meant nothing. It was a piece of paper. Someone else had called us one day and said, I found a certificate, my uncle has passed away, can I have the cask? It doesn't work like this. So we were getting all these flashes of thinking, these things are with me for quite some time. Lots happens in a year, never mind in 5 years. What am I going to do about this? And so the certificate issue was a massive thing for me. The audit trail was a massive thing for me. Vulnerability was a massive thing. And I realised that these things need addressed, and they need addressed a year into the business, not 3 years when things start to go wrong. So a lot of forward thinking.
When you talk about stock, like really, when you think about it, and something you could have, easily come across there is inheritance. Stock is inheritance. That's a huge value item. And you're right, anything can happen in a year, but if you're probably holding on to those casks for, how would the average?
Well, we have a 5-year storage with the casks, because most of them coming to us are new. Well, at the time would have been new fill, but we would renew that storage contract after 5 years, and that could be potentially for another 5. So 90% of the stock in there has been put in for 5 years, and that's every day. There's new stock going in for 5 years. So the first of 2021 will be changing into their 5-year period now next year. But already people have, marriages have broken up, people have died, all these things have happened. Naturally they happen in life. We all know that. And in 2022, I thought, how is this going to work if everybody's running around with a piece of paper? And there was no other system that would cope with that. And I saw a massive vulnerability. And because I care about, I am here every day, and I care about the business. I didn't want someone else coming knocking on my door saying, "Where's my cask?" And we've had private investigators. We've had everything. So the problem was there, and that needed solved, and I had no idea what to do. No idea.
So how did you come across Proof 8 then?
So I had a mutual friend who was part of the original Proof 8. Proof 8 changed their name not that long ago. And he knew we had quite a robust system. He knew that we were running a complex system, with the different operations that we were carrying out. And he said to me, look, could we look at doing maybe a management system? That's where Proofy started at, as a management system. And we met the team, and you know, the passion behind it, the drive behind what is now Proofy, it was there. The connection we had together was amazing, and I could see that if we could develop it to suit us, it would suit the entire industry, because we're so complicated. Ours was so complicated with levels of ownership, and with filling tanks, and with different types of barrels, and you know, we maybe have within our warehouse at the minute maybe 50 different types of barrels. And again, that niggle I had about the vulnerability of the spreadsheet, the vulnerability of the person who operated the spreadsheet. And we started, they came in with an idea, and we said, yeah, that's brilliant, but could we do this, and would you be able to do that? And they were amazing from the start. It came up with concepts that we could never have dreamt of. And you know, for me to sit here today and talk about blockchain 5 years ago, didn't know what cryptocurrency was.
But you know, it's funny because I teach a lot of supply chain management, and we talk quite a bit about blockchain. And I've talked an awful lot, but examples of blockchain, which this is,
yes, it is,
are very hard to find. You'll read a lot about blockchain, but actually, you know, this is blockchain. That information is locked. You can't actually, it has to be accessed. And tell me, was it bespoke created then for your business? Did Proof8 bespoke create?
They had their own system in place, and basically, as I gave them problems, I could say they bespoked it for me, but they didn't. They were bespoking it for the industry, because the industry, Margaret, when I came into it, it was very much how it was always done. You don't change it. You don't, you know, don't upset it. Don't tip my filing cabinet out. You know, please don't mess things up. And it didn't work for me, because we had too many issues were going to be put onto our shoulders as the warehouse keeper that might have come from distillery level. You know, once something leaves the distillery, it comes and it sits with us for those, you know, example, 5 years, and a lot happens. And so I wasn't prepared to be the person who would one day not want to answer the phone or answer an email. I didn't want to be that. And I explained that to the guys in Proofy, and they knew that they had to make something that was going to basically, for this industry, be bulletproof. It had to have compliance built in, it had to have audit trail, it had to have blockchain for the traceability of ownership, it had to have the digital deed for the asset to prove who owned it. That's been a massive thing, and I'm sure recently you've watched the Whiskey Bandits, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary enough, and there's a lot of, like, I mean, when you think of even security of data, cyber security, and all that's happened in the last, you know, couple of weeks in retail, especially with M&S and they're suffering. It's still like that risk, that management of data is still a huge issue across the world. It's massive,
and the onus on us as the warehouse is huge. You know, HMRC have excise notices, and we read them all, and we're compliant, and we do everything. But you know, if our interpretation of that information is incorrect, because you could read one thing and I could read it another way, you know, so what we've tried to do is make things with Proofy8 that it's a solid system, that if HMRC want to come in and do an audit, it's there, it's locked. We can't change it. If we have changed it, you can see it. And that traceability from leaving its origin to coming to us, and all the changes that happen here in between. You know, whiskey is produced here because it changes. We are producers, we're manufacturers. You know, and people find that difficult to understand, planners.
Well, that's a very valid point now, because it's maturing. So
and it's changing.
It's changing. So how would I say it, a technical point of view, a quality point of view, how is that monitored throughout those years, or you know, and does that feed into the system as well as is it like an ERP system? Or
it's very much, Irish whiskey is not Irish whiskey until it's 3 years old. So you know, we don't even call it whiskey when it comes in. It's new fill when it comes into us, unless it's 3 years or older. And during that process, you know, when it would leave us, the the strength would be different, there would be a flavour profile, the colour, the bulk volume would be different. A lot of the casks that would leave us, and we've had casks leave already, would leave and go to bottle, and things would be done at that stage. We would just put it out in cask as it came into us, and we give the ages and we give the relevant information, but we would never at any point check every single cask that goes out. We can't do that. It belongs to someone, and at that point then we could be tampering with a cask. There's so much to do with the individual ownership, there's so much to do with the individual asset, and there's so much to do with the traceability and accountability of those casks.
And can the whisky producer come into your warehouse and look at their stock, and do they often do that, or do they kind of?
The management companies, sometimes we would allow them. Management companies would come over just to prove that, to their customers, their casks are here, because things are very fractious in that industry at the minute. A very different industry to us, but cask sales, and there's a lot at the moment. That would be something that we have to tolerate. We don't like people being in the warehouse. It's not somewhere that you want to be taking lots of people into, because our rules and regulations here are so incredibly strict. We're a highly flammable business. You don't want somebody knocking their head on a cask, so we have to be very aware of where they're allowed to go, how many people can be there, who's responsible for them. So it's not something we encourage, but with the way that the industry of cask sales and cask management is at the moment after the Whisky Bandits, we know we have to help the management companies, because it's a huge industry, and when it's run correctly, it is a fantastic investment. But the blockchain, the digital deeds that Profi have provided, the system that they have had, we've had so many customers who are now so happy and know that they've got an asset, that it's not just something that has been made up. We were actually one of the companies who were in Whisky Bandits actually had casks in our warehouse. So we had a lot of crying from their customers. They contacted us, and they were upset. A lot of people had lost a lot of money, and we had to tell a lot of people that their casks just weren't here. They were made up, and that again was the vulnerability of that little paper certificate. They were able to, the company in question were able to just send a piece of paper out and put the Foundry Vault on it. Or other places, as they did do, they didn't just use the Foundry Vault, they put other names onto it. Your cask 1, 2, 3, 4 is stored at the Foundry Vault. And it was too easy, Margaret. It was easy. You could see that there was this big gap if someone got in trouble and decided to start selling fake casks. It wouldn't be too difficult, even in Scotland, as they do with delivery orders. I could just see there's a few things on LinkedIn yesterday, and there's a couple of customers and companies who are concerned about fake delivery orders. They're just pieces of paper,
Yeah, it's very scary, and especially for the likes of whisky, which is huge value. Huge
value. Increasing in value. Yeah, and people, some people have invested hundreds of thousands of pounds and they have nothing to show for it. So that is not a place I wanted to be at any stage, and Proof 8 were there to lock that for me and to give me the confidence that going forward we could get bigger, as we've done. We've a second site, we have new planning permission, and we're growing because I now have that confidence behind me that this system can run my business.
So you're in the process of a second site.
We already have the second site.
Site.
Yeah, 2 full warehouses on it, and planning permission on this site I'm in today. More planning permission, and the demand is there.
And how does the Irish whisky producer know about you, or how do they interact with getting you to store their casks, or even filling the casks?
Yeah, so predominantly we have worked with cask management companies, and what happens is they will log on to Spirit Strength Verification Scheme to see who has maturation, or they'll see us. We've got good social media presence now, But word of mouth, we've not had to advertise, word of mouth. The customers we have, the managing agents we have a constant supply. They are very well regulated. They run good business practice. Anyone outside of that who would like to store with us would find out more than likely through word of mouth or social media. It's not a big island. Ireland is not a big island. But we're leading the way with Proof 8 in that we have to regulate this business. We have to make this business that it's strong, it's powerful, it's an amazing product. We need to make sure that there is no vulnerability in it, and that's where my passion for Proof 8 is that if that started at the top line at the distilleries, that traceability through blockchain would be there from the moment that went into the still.
And that's probably not there. It's probably not as far back as that yet, Jacqui, is it? Like, it's not going back to the distillery at all, is it? Like so there's a huge opportunity for Proof 8 to
Absolutely,
go
Margaret.
backward integration into the supply chain.
Absolutely, and I know they have distilleries in Scotland. I know that, but I think what we've realised is that if you can work from the bottom upwards, then you realise the problem that if you start it at the distillery level, which I think maybe at the beginning Proof 8 thought was the place to be, they have no idea or concept of how difficult it is at the end of the supply chain, at the end of the chain when we're maturing it. We have a huge responsibility. And so I think it's maybe been a benefit, and I hope they agree with me, that getting the customer who will finally own that cask and working backwards right through to the distillery level is maybe a better way to have a perfect scenario for the blockchain.
Well, I suppose actually, and as I always say, you only hear the problems always at the end of supply chain. And I always advise like the students that I work with, and when I've worked for in myself, you're in supply chain at the end of it, you're always to blame. If you're short, if the quality's not right, you're always like, someone is always pointing the finger at you.
And you know what? Yeah, you're exactly right. And I had a lot of problems at the beginning with one particular company who I have a great respect for, but they sent me every problem I could ever wish for, and I thank them for it because it didn't lull me into a false sense of security at the beginning of this journey. It showed me the vulnerability of this industry, which I thought was, regulated. It is regulated, but there were so many gaps in the market. So, without problems we can't have solutions, and without solutions we don't have things like Proof 8. That's what.
Yeah, it's true, and I think like what you're finding at the back end, because if Proof 8 was at the start where you wouldn't catch that level of intricacy at the end, you wouldn't catch it. So
right.
I think there's a huge learning curve in the work that you're doing with Proof 8 to be able to go back along the supply chain, because it's not an easy, and I think because the length of time stock, and talking to a lot of drink producers at the moment, you've a lot of money tied up there in stock, like an awful lot of money, and it's and even in this times it's very tricky because people are worried now that sales are going to slow down.
That's right.
But I think actually where you're located as well in the north of Ireland is probably a real benefit for producers in the Republic. I'd be right, would I, Jacqui? Yeah.
Especially at the moment.
Especially at the moment. Yeah. So
placed at the moment. Yeah, and Proof 8 being alongside us, with the strong, robust system that we have there, and the traceability and the accountability that we have, that and the trade that we could have now, it really does put us in a very niche position, because with an ever expanding business here, we can see that if we really wanted to go for it, you could push this a lot further, but you have to go at the pace that that planners and developers allow us to move at. So
yeah, which I can imagine from a compliance perspective as well. There's a lot in that. So I get, Jacqui, from your business that you take risk management seriously, very, very seriously. And I think that's, from what you say to me, is that's from experience.
Yes.
Of stuff you've experienced.
When you grow up in business, I've never worked for someone. We've always worked for ourselves. You grow up in business, and you see the pitfalls of business, and you see the privileges of being in business. you have to be fully dedicated to something, and you have to have, I think, Margaret, it was a bit like the interior design, the passion had gone. And when the fire stops burning, then you don't have the drive and determination. And the moment that I heard that this had never been done before, something fired up inside me, and I said, I'm going to do that. And when I do something, I'm determined to do it to its best level. As are my co-founders. My wonderful co-founders are of the same grit and determination. You know, we're not going to settle for a half glass of whiskey. We want the full measure.
But I think that's the entrepreneurial spirit.
It is.
And I think you're dead right. And you know, I often find that sometimes I could do a project and then I'm done with it. I'm done with it, and I need to move on to something else and something else. Yeah. And sometimes that can be a bit challenging in your head. I don't know if you find that, like when you kind of, you know, you can't stay at something very long. You're moving, right.
And you can be accused of being a bit fickle and dipping your toe here. I think in this industry, you know, the misconception of putting it into the warehouse, pulling the door down as she looks at the door, pulling the door down and saying, "That's you for 5 years." How so far from the truth, so far from how it actually works, planning and logistics. And you know, there's never 2 days the same in this business. It looks so quiet. Most deliveries are in first thing in the morning. It looks so quiet and peaceful, and it smells amazing, but there's a lot of hard work in the background.
I would imagine as well too, and you know, that all of your customers are probably looking for, because there's a huge financial value here, that there's a valuation required. So all that process probably comes into the system, that the valuation is...
The system's been amazing, even down to, you know, how much alcohol we can store in a site before we reach certain levels of health and safety. And Proofy have built everything into it, and it's ongoing, Margaret. It's there, you know, there's tickers for everything. So, you know, there's tickers for the value. We have to report every month the duty suspension to HMRC, because everything's obviously sitting here in duty suspension. You know, we have to report if we take a sample. All of the reporting that we need to do is now being integrated into the Proofy system. I remember doing, that's security alarm, someone's at the gate. Yes. I remember doing my first ever return to HMRC, and I had to do it manually because they hadn't sent codes and couldn't get logged in. And I cried. I thought, how do I do this, and what if I put a wrong figure in? And you know, I was doing it on my own, and now it's press a button, it's gone. You know, so the next person coming into this industry is never going to have that same sick feeling that I had the first day you have to send off your return to HMRC.
And you know, because that's not the best use of your time, no disrespect to you now at all. Like,
I'm glad you said it, Margaret. Yeah. Not at all. No, it's not.
And that's where digitalisation is critical, and that support of a system that can just support that, because that's quite a lot of reporting, compliance and all of that, and for it to be accurate and right, because the human eye sometimes, and you've referred to it before about the Excel sheet that grew and grew and grew, and I've seen that in a lot of businesses where next thing and someone different comes in to manage the Excel sheet, and it's carnage if someone else touches your sheet.
Right. It was one of my biggest fears. It was one of my biggest fears, and while it worked for the operator, I then became afraid to look at it, because I thought, if I touch something here, I copy something by accident. So no, Proofy they have taken that stress away, that you have your audit trails, you have your stock management control. You can at any time go into the warehouse and scan a QR code. You know exactly where that cask has come from, who owns it, what date it came in, what's in it. That digitalisation of the warehouse has been invaluable to us, and going forward will strengthen the business, and will strengthen the relationship that we have with the management companies, the cask brokers, the distilleries and the cask owners. There was recently, 3rd of March this year, there was a huge change in the law in HMRC, and they revoked what we had as the WOGR, which protected the warehouse as we saw it. And it protected us from having to deal with individual clients. At the moment we hold about 40,000 casks, all of 90% of which are individually owned. And overnight we became responsible for those individual owners, not cask management companies. A lot of people in the industry with us were unaware that the WOGR actually was revoked, and that overnight they were responsible for their clients in warehouse. And we had already had this in the system with Proof 8. We knew it was coming. We'd been told for years it was going to happen, but we never knew a date. And when we knew it was coming, it was like, Proof 8, guys, can you forward plan that for us? So that on the 3rd of March we were like, hey, that's okay. We've got everything we need to do sorted. So no one can store with us now unless they sign into Proof 8. No cask management companies can store with us unless they decide to sign up.
Because that ownership is a huge piece.
Massive.
It's a huge responsibility. So, I mean, having Proof 18 then protects you that nothing is actually getting into your warehouse or system at all unless they sign up there.
And the due diligence that they're running in the background, and we have to be accountable for, money laundering. Has someone done something wrong and they've bought casks with bad money? All of that KYC, all of the due diligence that's carried out on top of what we do ourselves, has been built and locked into that system.
So it allows you to focus on the actual maturation and the storage, and Proof 8 look after all your compliance, which is fantastic.
That's it, Margaret. That's it. And it means your team's small. It doesn't have to be a massive team. And it means that, and when we have problems or we see another problem coming in the industry, that they're there to readjust the sales and make it work for us and for everyone else in the supply chain.
Fantastic. So, Jacqui, how can we find out? How can you be contacted? We'll put the links at the bottom of this podcast for yourself and Proof 8.
Yes, so we're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website is www.thefoundryvault.com. And there's email addresses and things there where we can be contacted.
Fantastic. Jacqui, thanks so much. It's been an unbelievable whirlwind of digitalisation here this morning, and so delighted to speak to an actual company who's operating a blockchain strategy. So we hear an awful lot about it. Very hard to actually get someone that's actually doing it. So thank you, Jacqui. Take care.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye.